So I have to confess that when I was a younger person, maybe even a younger child, when I would read these verses from the scriptures, I was kind of at a loss because I thought that what this man had done was the most logical thing a man would do, right? If you have a very successful harvest and your barn is not big enough to store what you have harvested, why not build a larger barn to contain what you have harvested? Yet, of course, I knew that this could not be right because God himself says to the man, he is a fool. So I understood this was not right, but I was somewhat perplexed because I thought this was the logical outcome as a younger person. But on a closer examination, there's a lot of things missing in this man's internal monologue that he's having with himself about his success. We never see a hint of gratitude toward God for what he has received. Not a sliver. In fact, this monologue he has with himself doesn't even mention the name of God at all. Nowhere does he mention God. This man cares nothing for the next life at all, it would seem. He doesn't seem to be preparing for a judgment, nor does he seem to worry about this. Maybe his far-off mortality is real to him, but he's staving it off. He's securing himself with his own possessions. He's proud in his great success. And his life seems to be focused solely on pleasure, eat and drink and be married. Finally, he has no thought about charity, about how he will share these goods that he has. And God says to him, whose will these be? Of course, this man doesn't seem to think this way. And he doesn't want to share his goods, to make sacrifices to God, or to give to the poor. These verses remind me of some others in the scriptures. From the first epistle of John, the holy theologian says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. And James, the brother of the Lord, says this in his epistle, adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. So we can see there's a connection between this man. He seems like a friend of the world, this rich fool. But what do we make of all this? This is kind of hard. Is it wrong to be successful in harvesting your crops? And at the same time, I thought that the world was good. God has made it, right? When we read the book of Genesis, God, over the 6 days of creation, he says at the end of each day, and God saw that it was good. And then he rests on the Sabbath day, sanctifying it and taking joy in what he has made. So can we say that his creation is bad? We cannot say this. So we have to make a distinction between God's creation and the world. We have to diversify these ideas. So what is the world? What is creation? Well, we know creation is good, but we also know that creation has fallen. And that when Adam sinned, following Satan who sinned in the celestial realm, Adam sinned in the terrestrial realm, all of creation groans now under the sins of Adam. Adam's sin has brought a curse upon all of creation, and all of creation groans. And what has happened to God's creation? It has become the world. Well, what is the world? The world is the egotism and the passions of man superimposed over the creation of God. The creation of God is good, but man has changed the way that it's governed. In fact, Satan and man, fallen man, have written a new rule book as to how one should live their life in the world. This kingdom that God has made for Adam to dwell in, it has now become the kingdom of pride, because what is the highest goal of man? To be loved by men. We want the respect of other men. We want to be glorified by men. Hence, pride. In fact, how do we advance? We advance by stepping on the heads of our brothers as we ascend the ladder of success. We want power over others. We want to fulfill, once we have love of men, once we are adored by men, and once we have the power we want, we then move to fulfill all of our other desires, all of our lusts, for food, for the pleasures of the body, for slothfulness, so forth and so on. And happiness is defined this way. What about greed? Greed is another law of this world. in which we secure ourselves by our possessions. I feel secure because I have a large house, or I am secure because I have many possessions or much money. This secures me. And we are greedy. We seek what we have, what we can get. And yet, what happens when we don't get these things? What happens when we don't have the power we desire, or the adoration we want, or the lust that we cannot fulfill our lusts, and we see that there are others who have more money than we, that are more handsome than we, that are more beloved than we? Well, then we follow the next rule of life. That is, we become envious, and we become full of rage. And if we cannot take from these people what they have, then we will slander them. We will cut them down, at least shorten them a little bit in our own sight. This is the law of this world. And if someone, for any reason, offends us, then comes the law of revenge, the rule of revenge, by which this world functions. And this is a basic guide to Satan's rulebook, a basic guide to our rulebook for life. And as you notice, success cannot be counted, or will never be measured, in meekness or humility or obedience, or certainly not martyrdom. This is not the way that the world does business. Now you can see why the Lord in Luke 16:15 says, He said to them, You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. So what is esteemed highly by us, God hates. That's such an interesting thing, isn't it? What men most seek after, God loathes and hates. What an interesting way to think of the world. In fact, Abba Isaac says something really interesting. He expounds on this point. He says that to the ascetical man, to the righteous man, the man who loves God, all human praise, all human glory is actually like pus, which we don't consider to be very valuable, do we? But that's how much the ascetics value it. The ascetics value the praise of men as much as you might value pus. You throw it away. You get rid of it. And so that's how the holy men were. They threw it away. Just like we throw pus away, they threw it away too. So what does it mean to be a friend of the world? What does it mean to be a friend of the world? Hence an enemy of God. What it really means is to live in the creation of God as if there is no God at all. As if God is not here. As if He does not run His creation. As if all things do not come from Him. And as if there is no judgment. That's what it means to be a friend of the world. Is to live in God's creation without Him. And we can easily see that this applies to the rich man from what I said in the beginning and from what we have just said. It's very obvious that the rich man is a friend of the world and he's an enemy of God. And that's why God calls him a fool. Abba Isaac says some things about the world. Of course, he's a great monk and he talks about fleeing the world. But it's interesting because if you read his discourses, he says that to flee from the world really means to flee from the passions. Because he associates the passions with the world. So he says when you flee the passions, it means you flee the world. And to flee the world means to flee the passions. That's what it means. Now many holy people, men and women, in their great humility and wisdom realized, I cannot escape from my passions unless I put physical distance between them. Hence they went to the desert. But all people are called to flee the world. And many monastics went to the monastery and they found the world there. Because their passions were there waiting for them, and the passions of their brothers or sisters. So we must flee the passions, and this is how we should live, and not be a friend of the world. But at the same time, creation is still good, is it not? Well, certainly it is. So what are we to do? How are we to balance this? We must hate the world. The scriptures are very clear about this. And to hate the world means to hate the passions. But what do we do with creation? What do we do with this goodness that God has given to us? And as I was perusing the bookstore one day, being bored, I walked into the bookstore. And I found this book and opened it. It was one of Father Zacharias' books. He has the blue, the red, and the green book. I opened the red book because I didn't own it, and I wanted to look at it. And the random page I opened to, I fell on this question that he was answering. And he spoke about this very thing. He said, how are we to live in the world? He said, we live in the world and we use it as we need to. We have needs and we fulfill them. We fulfill all the needs we have with the world. We do not set our heart thereon. Because, quoting Paul, he says, our heart is hid with Christ. In the Proverbs, God says, Son, give me thy heart. Give me your heart, son. So we give our heart to God, but we use the world as we need to. We delight in the world and we use it, but our heart is never attached to it, because our heart is always looking up towards God, towards our Father. I was speaking with another person this week about St. Porphyrios, And I bring him up because we know he's a great saint. But if you look at the life of St. Porphyrios, he loved the world. I want to say creation, forgive me. He loved creation. He loved it so much. He loved knowledge. Everywhere he went, he was reading books, school books, children's textbooks. He didn't have an education, so he spent his whole life becoming educated. And actually, he made incense. He actually started to make incense at one point. He was taking these different floral compounds, he was compounding it, he was making these incenses that were amazing, and he loved it. He loved every moment of it. He loved music. He wasn't trained in music either, so he studied it so that he might sing better. St. Porphyrios loved the knowledge of God's creation, but his heart was never set thereon. St. Paisius was the same. He loved animals. He loved nature. All animals flocked to him. And I could tell you 100 stories about the animals that would come to see him, but his heart was set on God, and that's why the animals came to him, because the animals could see that he wouldn't abuse them, and he wasn't lusting after what they had. He wasn't lusting after their existence, to eat them or to conquer them or capture them. His desire was God. St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain says that when we look at creation, creation is full of beauty, but this beauty should always catch us up to God. He said that if a man can gaze at the beauty of creation but not think of God, and take this beauty as being something in itself, he says that man is unnatural. We could even replace that word with perverse. That man is being perverted. If you see beauty in creation, that should catch you up to greater beauty. What is that? Virtue. And what is beyond virtue? The ocean of God's greatness, the ocean of God's glory. This is what you're being caught up to. So when you look at creation, always look at it, but let it guide you to something higher. Let it guide you to higher things. Brothers and sisters, I'll end by expressing a kind of parable, I guess. Let us say that we have a beloved Father whom we love tremendously, to whom we are greatly devoted. And our Father has a grand house, like one of those English estates, from the Georgian era, whatever. A grand house, and he has a grand park of land, and a grand garden, and forest, and property. And we love our Father. And our Father is a great man. He's also like a polymath. He built this whole house himself and designed it. And he also designed his gardens and arranged them as he wished them to be. And when we go into our Father's house, we see that he designed the house so well that light enters from all these different places, no matter which time of the day that it is. And the house is always bathed in light, bathed in beauty. And he decorates it accordingly. And all things show our Father's virtue. But because we are our Father's children, we love him so much that when we see the house, the delight of its beauty is a delight in our Father, because we know it was his creativity that brought it forth. That our Father's virtue and his love of beauty brings this forth. And when we walk through the garden, we see the same thing. We take such delight in it, because every single thing reflects our Father's work, our Father's action, our Father's care, how the shadows of the evening will fall in such a way. Our Father has thought of it, and he designed his garden this way. And we take such joy in this. And yet, without our Father, what is the house? What is the garden? Nothing, except a memory of our Father, perhaps. Right? It's our Father that gives life to it. Beauty has its resonance in God. Right? It finds its final meaning in God. Brothers and sisters, let's walk through the garden of creation, the garden of our true Heavenly Father. Let us delight in it. Let us use it to satisfy our needs. But let's not set our hearts on it. Let's not become like the rich fool who wasted his life and had it taken from him when he was least expecting it, because he was not rich towards God. Amen.